John Ferguson.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to the latest Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by Mark Smith, who is the head of news for the Daily Record, and of course Douglas Dickie, who works for the Scottish Daily Express. So I think that the ghost of Alex Salmond continues to haunt Nicola Sturgeon and also John Swinney. Former First Minister has been dead for about 10 months, yet he continues to hog the headlines and make front page news. What we learnt at the weekend is that his family, basically his widow Moira, is going to pursue legal action against the Scottish Government. The backdrop to that is a few years ago, Nicola Sturgeon's government launched an investigation into sexual harassment claims against Salmond. That investigation was effectively nullified by a court. It was an unlawful investigation. Alex Salmond, when he was alive, said he intended to pursue the Scottish Government legally, I think, for compensation. Then he died, and we all wondered what would happen to the case. And we learned at the weekend that Moira Salmond was going to be pursuing the Scottish Government. So, if you're in the market for pro-independence unity, if you want the warring sides in the independence debate to come together, Mark, not a great story if that's what you're looking for.
I mean, you're getting splits within splits. It's like the banana splits. It's the whole movement's in a mess. Still, as we always say, does well in the polls and is doing well in the polls, both the SNP and independents. So that's the first caveat, really, is that despite all the chaos, still rumbling along, and both the SNP and independents look like they're not going anywhere soon. However, let's take what's happened at the weekend there. Alba is now at each other's throats. And within the SNP, you talked about the ghost of Alex Salmond. I thought maybe John Swinney had maybe disappeared somewhere as well this week. I mean, he's been completely sidelined, almost anonymous, when it comes to these big issues that are haunting his movement. Where has he been? He told us this week that he's not read the book. Now, I don't know about you,
this
but
is the Sturgeon book that dredged up all the stuff about the splits and with Salmond.
I mean, his take was, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. But that won't really wash. I mean, Swinney has read that book. Of course he has. He probably read a proof of it before it even went to the publishers. I just don't buy it. He says he hasn't bought it, but that's another issue. He's got to get a grip. He's got to get a grip of his own party, and he's got to lay his own stamp on the party and the movement in order to get these warring factions into some form of unity. It looks like he's decided, however, that the best tactic is just to bury his head in the sand, or in this case, bury his head in a Western Isles Ferries bacon roll and disappear off to the islands for a few days.
The thing I don't get, Dougie, is what is the point of suing the Scottish Government? I mean, Salmond already won that case. He went to the Court of Session and the judges ruled in his favour. I think that was before the Scottish Government actually conceded that their investigation had been unlawful. It all seems to hinge on this idea that not only was the investigation unlawful, but there was a conspiracy there to do him down. And anyone looking at the facts would know that the key flaw in that investigation was that the investigator had prior contact with the complainants. And that was a big no-no, and that basically led to the whole thing collapsing. To make the leap that there was a conspiracy of senior SNP figures in the government who had maybe encouraged the women to come forward, all to do down a great man, it just seems like a fool's errand to me. And what do they hope to achieve by this?
Well, obviously, they hope to prove that there was a conspiracy. Alex Salmond certainly seemed to think that he had evidence to suggest that. Chris McKellarney alluded to it in the record story that he was going to he says he was never going to go full hog to court, but he was going to publish all this evidence. I mean, ultimately, from Moira Salmond's point of view, she's, in the past 10 months, she's lost her husband, and now she has to continually see his name getting dredged up again in a not too flattering picture made of him by his former protege. It feels to me like this may well have been parked permanently had Sturgeon's book not been, quite so ferocious against Salmond. Maybe that was a bit of an own goal from her point of view. I mean, ultimately, will it come to court? I've kind of got my doubts.
The tactic might be to put pressure on the Scottish Government in the hope that they settle out of court and there's some sort of payday and some sort of apology. That might be it.
Yeah, and I think then that also keeps the idea of the conspiracy alive. Government's paid out. It proves that there was a conspiracy. I'm not entirely convinced. I do agree with Smitty that John Swinney's been the missing man through all this, but I'm not entirely convinced it's going to have a massive impact on the SNP or independence movement as a whole. Because I've said on here many times, I think we're in danger of giving Alba more publicity than they've earned. They've never had anyone elected properly. They rely on defections. I don't think they're going to get anyone elected next year.
Yeah, it was basically a vehicle for Alex Salmond's rehabilitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was always and revenge.
It's very much a fringe element of the independence cause. I mean, John Swinney's this idea that he's got to get on top of the movement. He probably does to shore up his vote, but he's also got a country to run, and he's not doing a particularly good job of it. And there's an election less than a year away when the focus is going to turn on that running in the country, and people are fed up at the constant, even a lot of independence people, or people who are sympathetic to independence, are fed up of hearing these constant constitutional wranglings. Well, and if Swinney's going to win that election, and by win it, he himself has pretty much created a situation where to win it, he's got to win a majority, which is almost impossible. So
I think as long as people believe that independence is the best way forward, and a lot of people do, I'm on the fence, so a lot of you're against, but as long as a lot of people want that to be an issue, you can't just wish it away. No. It's going to have to be central to every Scottish election as long as it's an unresolved issue. I think this idea that people should just forget about it is for the birds. And as for conspiracy, I think that's an interesting word to use, because I think the word conspiracy is flung at the Salmond supporters. They're alleging a conspiracy, and that immediately conjures up images of tinfoil hats and people who think the moon landings were actually in the Nevada desert. Just because they are alleging there was some sort of attempt to corral people into making accusations against Salmond, I don't think that's necessarily a conspiracy. And the actual truth of the matter might lie somewhere in between both camps. However,
women talking to each other about their shared experience.
Perhaps collusion maybe a better.
I would just say
conversation.
I would just say a conversation. A lot of conversations took place, let's face it, about Salmond's conduct behind closed doors.
And if there's a conspiracy, there's a conspiracy of silence about his behaviour. There
was certainly that, but I think the word conspiracy is flung at maybe the Salmond people, the people who support Salmond, by Salmond supporters to people who are want to clear his name. I don't think it's necessarily that there was a conspiracy. It was simply that there was a conversation. However, you've got people like Joanna Cherry, who are obviously very powerful figures within the independence movement. They are adamant that there was some form of corrupt conspiracy at work, and as long as people like Joanna Cherry are making these allegations, that issue is just going to rumble on. And this court case, if it ever gets to court, will be dynamite. It'll be amazing stuff. You'll have all sorts of stuff coming out, and that'll be great for us as news gatherers. But my word,
I can't wait for Joan's book as well. It'll be a
cracker.
I mean, the Salmond supporters really want all the stuff about the sleepy cuddle coming out again. It just seems like, why would you want another court case where you can't really work out where it's going to go, who's going to win it, particularly if you're alleging conspiracy, which is a very difficult thing to prove. I mean, you alluded, or you spoke about the splits in the independence movement, Smitty. The Sunday Mail broke the story at the weekend about Moira Salmond pursuing the legal case. We had a story on the Tuesday. Chris McElhaney, who was Salmond's right-hand man in Alba, he was the general secretary of that pro-independence party. He came out quite clearly saying it's the wrong move. They shouldn't do it. Salmond, when he was alive, didn't actually want to do it. And it will really damage pro-independence unity, because if you look at it from an Alba perspective, their whole strategy going into the next election is that people vote SNP in first past the post and they transfer to Alba on the second vote. Now, who's going to do that if both those parties are at each other's throats and they hate each other and they can't even speak to each other?
That's the irony. That's the irony of a party which is a split in itself. They want a unified independence movement, really, so that they can get these friendly second votes on the list. And I think Alba are going to have a good, by the way, list of candidates across the country, people that are quite attractive. I mean, we all saw how Margot MacDonald did in the Lothians when she stood as an independent nationalist. She apparently, if there were two Margos, they would have both got in. You know, that was the old thing they used to say there. So a slate of good candidates for Alba, I think, could see them make a breakthrough. Here in maybe Tommy in Glasgow, for example, Tommy Sheridan, you know, our old pal, but they could have a slate of candidates across the country who are maybe worth voting for. Maybe Joanna Cherry will be among them. So, you know, I think Chris McElhaney, the Alba guy, who gave us that story this week, I think he's right to try and knock that on the head for the sake of that particular party.
He also made an interesting point, which will probably stick in the throats of some in his former party, that's Alba, not the SNP. He said that Nicola Sturgeon is still popular amongst SNP supporters. And I think that is true. I mean, she's a tarnished figure in terms of her record in government, but I am not surprised, but struck by the number of particularly women who say that they admire Nicola Sturgeon. And despite many mistakes during COVID, I think the handling of the pandemic is probably central to that. You know, I'm not saying I share that analysis, but you know, she is still popular amongst swathes of the population. So to effectively go for her government and alleged conspiracy, I'm not sure it's a great move ahead of a
I don't
Scottish
think
election.
though. I mean, I don't see anyone. You're talking who's going to go from SNP to Alba if they're at each other's throats. I don't see any evidence that people are going for SNP to Alba anyway.
I don't. They've never won an election.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
So I'm going to disagree with Smitty. I don't think they'll make an electoral breakthrough
Fiver
next year. Done. There we go. Fiver to your
one
chosen
MSP.
charity.
Oh no, I want the money for beer.
Okay. Well, a beer. But you know, the whole Sturgeon thing as well, going after Sturgeon, I think it is, you know, it does, her popularity does stem from the pandemic, where she was basically able to make herself, you know, give herself a party political broadcast every day under the guise of a public health warning.
Shrewd.
Yeah, well, absolutely. She took advantage of the situation. And she is still a divisive figure, but that means that there's, you know, we quite often concentrate on those who no longer like her, those who've kind of turned against her, but there's a lot of devotion as well. I just don't, I think it's such a niche issue, this. I don't think it's going to have any real electoral impact next year. Smitty said earlier that you know, you can't just park independence when it's at the top of so many people's agenda. I don't think it is at the top of many people's agenda, despite, you know, support for independence remaining pretty solid. People, you know, we've seen it last year at the general election. Independence, line 1, page 1, gubbin. And I think there's even less people now. You know, what they want next year is they want to see the NHS get sorted. They want to see public services get sorted. They want to see their councils being properly funded.
But the last thing Swinney wants is for the election to be fought on that.
Of course.
So that's why he'll make independence the central issue.
Of course.
And he'll put reform up as the big bogeyman.
He's already kind of
he's already kind of starting that in the Hamilton by-election.
It was such a disaster in Hamilton, and yet he appears to be kind of dusting it down again.
You know something though, people say it was a disaster in Hamilton, Labour won that fair and square, but you look at the vote, it was effectively a three-way split. I mean, Reform won 26% of the vote. I think if they'd won 12%, you could say with some credibility, sounding the alarm about Reform was just nonsense. But I thought 26% of the vote, I mean, that was a pretty remarkable result for a party that had no operation on the ground. I can see why Swinney is pursuing this strategy, and I've got no doubt that it's partly motivated by cynicism, but the rise of Reform is not a mirage. This is based on reality.
It is true, and that's why Swinney's pushing that again, despite the disaster. But what you've got to remember in Hamilton, Rutherglen, is that Labour had a really good local candidate. I know he was criticised for his lack of media appearances, but I mean, I got it from sources within the camp that he was considered a real asset on the doorsteps because he knew the issues locally and he came across well. He sounded to the voters like one of them. And I think that's a sign for Labour about where they should go with all their candidates. Get local good candidates in who are not afraid to take on local issues. I think if Labour do that, they could end up cashing in and maybe coming through the middle of this Reform SNP sandwich, which sounds like a terrible ordeal for anybody. But yeah,
well, maybe you can buy one for £5 with your winnings. But this is kind of my point about like people have kind of lost interest in these big kind of concepts, independence, the rise of the far right. They want a guy who understands, a guy or a woman who understands their feelings on the doorstep, who understands that, I went to get a GP appointment yesterday. I phoned my GP 2 weeks' time and it's a phone appointment, and that's that's the earliest you can get. People want, doesn't really matter for me. It's not like an urgent thing, but it could be,
there's nausea caused by Rangers' defeat.
Oh, there we go. Right, I'm off. But that's what people want, and that's why Labour won in Hamilton, because you're a guy who understood the people on the doorstep. Yeah. And these big kind of issues, they're getting increasingly parked, I think, in favour of, especially up here, in favour of stuff that happens on the ground.
I hope it is about bread and butter issues in the next election, because the SNP on drug deaths, absolute disgrace, and it seems that they've been behind the curve again with the current explosion in drug deaths with the spread of nitazene fake opioids, which are causing a new wave of death and destruction in housing schemes. GP appointments, even the transport system. The SNP are failing in so many regards. The next Holyrood election should be about that.
A devolved election should be about devolved issues.
Yeah.
But this will be the first one in years that is about devolved issues.
There's the other show in town of the UK government. The SNP will try and make it about Keir Starmer's first couple of years in power, and you can't really tell people that they must vote on the NHS and education.
No, but I think people are going to. I think the majority this time are going to be voting on that.
Yeah. Just to wrap this bit up, I think looking at it from Swinney's perspective, he wants to look to the future. He's trying to turn around the NHS and failing. He's trying to turn around the education system. It's not quite working. The last thing he wants is to be dragged back into the sort of melodrama between Salmond and Sturgeon. If I was him, I might be a little bit pissed off with Nicola Sturgeon. He was very loyal to her, a loyal deputy, and now he's having to answer for all this nonsense that he probably thought had been put to bed a long time ago.
He must be sitting there thinking, why did you do this to me, Nicola, right? And you have to beg the question of Nicola as well. Why did she do it? Don't think she's
John, I want to make some money.
But is it just the money? I mean, she can't be short of a bob or two. I mean, she's been a well-paid person for a long time. Was it really just for the money? I can't fathom. It seems to have caused her some consternation personally as well. The process of writing it and publishing it and publicising it. I mean, well, you were there, saw her in person at a couple of events. She didn't come across as somebody who was, untroubled by events. She seemed to be a troubled soul throughout the whole process of publicising.
She's always been bookish. I think she's always wanted to write a book. Given that she's longest serving First Minister, it was the obvious.
She could have followed up pal Val McDermott and written a wee crime novel.
I think that's probably to come as well.
I hope so.
But
or a romance, perhaps.
The timing's not good for
the heart of government. Is that what it's
could be? Call it grasp the thistle or something. Yeah.
It's
Can't
about a
wait.
female first minister who did the dirty on a male predecessor. No, I don't think it's going to be that at all. So yeah, just moving on. There was a protest in Falkirk, I think on Saturday. The protesters were complaining about a hotel that houses asylum seekers. We've seen many such protests south of the border as well. It was organised by a group called Save Our Future and Our Kids' Futures. They said that they've got no affiliation to the far right, but there were some far right horrors at the event. A group called Patriotic Alternative, who we've covered. There were banners such as "Kill them all." Now, Smitty, I think the point to make here is that protesting against immigration and asylum does not make someone a racist, but these protests do tend to attract racist groups, like a magnet for them, to cause trouble and spread their poison. And that's the difficulty, isn't it, with these types of demonstrations?
What people have forgotten in the whole hubbub of this particular protest in Falkirk is there was also a demonstration by local people, not bussed in, local people involved in local trade unions, involved in local third sector groups and all that. They were there to say, we need to do our best to welcome people who are fleeing persecution. So they were there as well to do that. They were faced with a group, this other local group, who do have, I think, genuine concerns about how asylum seekers and economic migrants can be integrated into communities if they're not to be, bunged on a flight to Rwanda. I think on both sides there was people in the local community that had good arguments to make. However, there were also a bunch of absolute outright Nazis and fascists there who feed off this sort of debate. We have to shine a light onto these issues, and there are towns across Scotland where these asylum hotels are, and people have genuine concerns about big groups of young men. It's often young, economically active men who come into a community. How does that affect local services? How does that affect how that's policed? And these are genuine concerns. But as ever, you have the forces of the right, given, I think, a license to operate by Nigel Farage and Reform because of their, frankly, racist take on the whole affair. And they are empowered, and they come into areas like that, and they exploit these genuine concerns for their own gain, as the far right always does. And we have to be absolutely alive to that, I think, at all times, that they are always there waiting, like a skeleton in the cupboard, just waiting to jump out anytime any of this stuff gets raised. So I think local people raising concerns is fine, but really we need to highlight and we need to oppose the far right when they start on their rants, and hopefully that will all be able to do that without any more nonsense.
I think the issue, though, for some people is that because so much focus, and I agree with almost everything somebody said there, that the genuine concerns can often be lost when these things are taken over by sinister groups. But because a lot of people focus on these sinister groups, it gives the impression that they're that the ordinary person's concerns aren't being listened to. And because there's this focus on alternative voice, alternative voice, then you're kind of dismissing, the kind of political class is kind of dismissing the concerns of everyone, and they're dismissing it as just racist. So it kind of works both ways. So on one hand, the presence of these groups detracts from the the ordinary people's genuine concerns, but it's only because it suits certain people to use those patriotic voices or whatnot to take the focus away from the genuine concerns, because there are issues. We've seen it down south. It's much more prevalent down south. Up here, I mean, we know that there's far less asylum seekers in Scotland per head of population, so right away it's not going to be as big an issue up here. But I think what it shows is that where you do have these migrant hotels, then this idea that somehow Scottish people are different, that we don't have the same concerns as down south. It's just nonsense. And the reason you don't see it as much is because it's not as big an issue, but where it does exist,
responses
you're
are
going to
broadly
see
similar.
the response. You're going to see these responses, and you're
One
going to see it more and
interesting-
more.
One interesting thing, I think the most interesting thing about this debate and a lot of other debates is how you do have a centrist, kind of liberal, civic class in Scotland, if you like. They run local government, they run charities, they run lots of institutions, and they basically hate working class people. They either hate everything they do, everything they say, everything they think, or alternatively, they've never met one, so they just don't know who they are or how they behave. And that comes through a lot, I think, in Scottish political life. We have this band of civic do-gooders whose concerns are middle-class concerns because they are middle-class people. And they just didn't have a Scooby-Doo what life's like where I'm from. Well, where I was born and raised in Western Hales.
Where you left?
Well, I first bought out. No, but I mean, we all of us know roughly what these communities are like, and we've all been there. We've all, we all know the concerns. But even when it comes to things like the drug crisis, this middle-class sect who runs Scotland, they didn't give a stuff about the drug crisis until my good friend Mark McGivern, our chief reporter, decided to raise it in the record that we really went big on it, and then suddenly it became an issue. But I think the same applies maybe in this case. They don't really understand that in communities like that, these centres can have an impact, and they need the SNP in particular, but also that wider cast of civic Scottish people need to get into communities like that and realise the impact it has. And then they can maybe make better, more informed decisions about how these issues are dealt with, Sorry about the rant, but you get the idea.
No, I get the idea, yes. Let's face it, the protest we saw in Falkirk, that's not going to be the final one. I would imagine we're going to see them around different parts of Scotland, maybe not to the same extent in England, but I think for decades we've had this narrative of Scottish exceptionalism, that were different to people in England, that were more liberal, more left-wing. But if you look at the polling data, I think that we're remarkably similar when it comes to our attitudes towards these questions. And that doesn't mean to say that we pander to nastiness in any way, but I think people on the centre-left have to have answers.
And I think Labour are on the verge, by the way, you might disagree, Dougie, but I think Labour are on the verge of turning things around. I think we're starting to see ideas come to the fore, like a wealth tax, like a proper property tax to try and get access to some of that wealth for the greater good. I think Labour are trying to reposition the British economy so that it is more equal and it is a bit more focused on the super rich paying their share. I think that will prove popular eventually, and it'd be a shame if all that progress was dashed on the rocks because of an issue that does trouble a lot of people and that they really need to get a grip of. I think they've got an issue. They've got a deal with France coming, where everyone who comes in unaccounted for on the boats, maybe a one-in, one-out system, and we get a genuine asylum seeker identified coming over as families and all that, and it's a one-in, one-out system, so that we can tackle that particular issue of young undocumented men coming into the country. That to me seems like a good solution. And if Labour can make progress on that, I think that would be a great advance on this debate.
I'm not convinced the person in the street's seeing this great economic miracle that's taking place. Inflation on the rise again.
Thanks to the Tories. Thanks to the Tories, it's going to take a while.
I think inflation's coming down under the latter days of the Sunak.
It's mere the absolute tank.
It shot up and then came down a wee bit. Thanks, Rishi. Yeah. Well, it's a very, very difficult issue for Labour.
It's hard to talk about it because as soon as it's hard to discuss it because people do this same kind of liberty, if you like, that kind of runs Scotland. I think Smitty got it absolutely spot on. They don't understand working class people. They actively dislike the working class, and this kind of idea that the working class is the salt of the earth. If you open their doors to MD, if you actually dig deep down, they have real they have real concerns, and people don't. It's a really hard topic to talk about because people just dismiss you, straight away. They just dismiss any kind of
the
concerns.
Political right would say that the answer to that is for somebody like Reform to sweep in and pick up on that anger and exploit it. I would argue that's a mug's game, and that the way actually for working class people to re-establish their voice is to get behind, progressive parties. I think the SNP, however, have failed
but those
to
parties,
recognise, that anger.
But those progressive parties, Labour especially, to me, you were describing Labour then. You were describing Labour when you're talking about people who are supposed to be representing the working man, who actually hate the working man.
I think Labour's full of good working class people. I think Labour is a party that does understand working class communities, and it is active, and a lot of the members are from the working class. I think that's a bit of a myth about Labour, that it's completely run by middle class do-gooders.
Not completely, but
there are some of them.
Yeah,
too many,
including the men at the top. I think
possibly
both here and in Scotland and
his dad was a toolmaker. Keir Starmer,
of course, of course.
Must have heard that. Finally, just another difficult issue: Ukraine. So over the last few days, the Prime Minister and other EU leaders were in the White House meeting President Trump. So was President Zelensky of Ukraine, to discuss the outlines of a deal that seems to have been struck between Trump and Putin. I've got a real sense of dread about this. I know that there were all smiles on the cameras and no one wanted to upset Trump, but every indication is that a large part of the land that Putin illegally seized from Ukraine is going to stay with Russia. And while America is not full scale behind Ukraine, there's no boots on the ground. It's hard to see how that can, what the alternative is. It looks like it's going to be a dark day for Europe.
I mean, we like this. Europe is tired after 3 years since the Russian invasion. But the reality is, Russia invaded Ukraine 11 years ago. This goes way back to the invasion of the Crimea. Ukraine has been facing off against, Russian aggression for over a decade. And I think people are tired. I'm not saying it's the right thing at all, because for a start, I don't think Putin's going to stop there. That's, you're just inviting him closer, closer and closer to the West. But I can understand to a certain extent why Trump is kind of saying this. I can understand it. How else does this, how else does this end?
Yeah, so I think
it's very difficult to see how else this ends now, and I don't think that's a good thing at all.
This whole debate, I think, is haunted by the Allied powers letting Hitler wander into the old Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland, and it's haunted by that historical fact, because they let him take an inch, and then obviously he tried to destroy the world. Right? It's haunted by that happening. It's haunted by that event, and I think that's obviously you still hear people in the Russian and Ukrainian side referencing the Second World War a lot. So, but this is different. I think there are areas of the Ukraine which are very strongly pro-Russian, and is it really the end of the world if we allow these areas to come back to Russian borders? If there is a slight redrawing of those borders, is it worth threatening world peace and a potential war between America and Russia when a small redrawing of borders might actually reflect the reality on the ground, and it might just keep Russia at bay?
It's not the end of the world, but I think it's a disaster. I mean, Ukraine is a sovereign, independent country. Putin decided he wanted some of it back
and so did a lot of people in those areas
in Russian hands. But those people weren't given a choice. It was simply seized. It's not like there was a vote.
Well, there was actually a referendum.
Well, I mean, in terms of the bits that are going to be kept by Russia, it's not like there's going to be some sort of nationwide referendum.
I don't want to. I'm not like some sort of Putin stooge. I hate Putin. I think the guy's an absolute threat to the world order. And also, we don't want to reward aggression, do we? However, we are in a position where Ukraine could end up just being defeated in this war. If Trump pulls out, and
they already have.
Well, exactly. They're fighting for their lives, and we ought to support them there, and we ought to be in support of Zelensky. However, if a peace deal, a proper lasting peace, means we get to have European and maybe American air support to support a redrawn border in the east of Ukraine, and it stops the war, that's a good thing. I think rather than it filling me with dread, it's filling me with a bit of a hope that there might actually be.
And then
a
Russia
resolution.
regroups and decides to take a bite of another.
But for the first time, though,
country.
we'll have a recognition by Russia, backed up by European boots on the ground and also American air support, that it's this.
And this security guarantee from the US seems to be built on sand. I mean, it's very vague. What does it mean in practice? I'm just picturing Putin laughing at us all.
But what it maybe means in practice is that Putin knows that, it can't really go any further.
Not in Ukraine, but maybe another European country.
I'm going to ask you a hypothetical, Smitty.
Yeah, right.
Right. You're talking about these areas of Ukraine that are ethnically Russian or identify as Russian. So the next independence referendum in 50 years, once another generation has passed.
In Scotland.
Scotland votes to leave the UK, but the borders in Dumfries and Galway vote decisively to remain in the UK. And the UK invades to protect
nation states,
the interests of
the
people.
The idea that nation states are eternal.
No, you're right.
Beings,
I've just read a book about borders. Borders are extremely fluid.
Extremely fluid, always have been, But by the way, Scotland stays Scotland. In fact, we'll take Berwick back.
You know me, independence for Edinburgh. There's a cause everyone can rally behind.
And you know me, independence for Edinburgh. Let's get you guys going.
The passport office at Hart Hill. I can see it. You know what I mean? I have been stopped there by the police a few times, by the way.
European away days to Tynecastle on Easter Road. Can't wait.
We're checking your passport before you get to Dorking, mate. I'm telling you that.
All right. I think that probably wraps it up. Thanks to Mark and to Dougie again. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.